All right. Hello, hello. It's Michelle, the Childcare Entrepreneur. Now, we are continuing with our discussion of policy for childcare. And I'm going over a lot of the things for New Jersey because that is the state where I live. Please make sure that you check uh, in your own state to see what policies um, are coming about, as a lot of the monies are being rolled out through stabilization grants and things like that. So Assembly Bill number 4746, second reprint, November 8th, 2021. Now I have some notes here. I'm going to be looking to the side a little bit to read those. So I just want to give you a kind of an overview of what this bill is about. So um, I'm going to read over it, not the whole thing. This is 5 pages long, but just some of the things that I pulled out as I was reading it over and over again. You're going to hear words like DHS, which stands for Department of Human Services. You are going to hear state and federal funding, subsidy payments, paying based on enrolled child versus attendance, emergency or temporary emergency measures versus long-term viability, expanded assistance, essential workers and families, pandemic-related stabilization. And then it'll go into how much money was given during lockdown, after, and monies to come. So you'll hear figures like $1 billion invested thus far, and that breakdown includes $100 million invested by DHS to increase provider reimbursement. In 2020, dedicated $400 million in federal funding to stabilize the industry during the first phase, provided over $70 million in grants to providers, $800 million in support for measures that move beyond pandemic-related stabilization and strengthen the state's child care system over the long term. Signed Bill number 3990, second reprint, dedicating $100 million in federal dollars to a child care revitalization fund. And last month, it was announced plans to invest another $70 million to help parents pay for childcare. And then DHS just announced an investment of another $83 million to increase provider reimbursement rates for the state's child care assistance program. So after all that is mentioned, and I'm paraphrasing a lot of these points, once we read over, you'll see the specifics. The zinger here, you're going to hear words like in spite of, after careful consideration, DHS only intended it to be temporary. And then we're going to move down and you're going to see words like indefinitely, amended through June 30th, 2022, and then some of the recommended amendments that are made. So let's go through this bill. All right, so Assembly Bill number 4746. To the General Assembly, pursuant to Article 5, Section 1, Paragraph 14 of the New Jersey Constitution, I herewith return Assembly Bill number 4746, second reprint, with my recommendations for reconsideration. The Department of Human Services, DHS, receives and administers state and federal funding to provide subsidy payments for eligible children to attend licensed child care centers and registered family child care providers, collectively providers. DHS pays providers a full subsidy to cover 100% of the cost of a child's attendance for each enrolled child who is in attendance or had excused absences for at least 80% of days during a pay period. If a child's unexcused absences result in the child's attendance dipping below 80%, DHS reimbursement is based on the child's actual attendance. In March 2020, DHS began providing full subsidy payments for all eligible children, regardless of attendance, as an immediate emergency response to the coronavirus disease 2019 COVID-19 pandemic. This enabled DHS to continue to fund providers at pre-pandemic levels in order to help them to remain open to care for children during the pandemic in spite of significantly fluctuating attendance and to ensure the provider's long-term viability. Intended as a temporary measure, DHS has thus far been able to continue the policy as additional federal child care relief funds have become available. Assembly Bill number 4746, second reprint, would make DHS's temporary emergency measure permanent, requiring DHS to pay subsidies based on the number of eligible children enrolled with the provider. The bill also would require DHS to study the difference between paying based on enrollment and paying based on attendance. I commend the legislature and the bill sponsors in particular for their sustained efforts to protect families and the childcare industry as we emerge from the COVID-19 pandemic. Since my first day as governor, I too have prioritized childcare. Providers, very often owned, operated, and staffed by women, and in particular women of color, are the lifeblood of our economy, necessary for New Jersey's working families to thrive, and a critical source of jobs in their own right. My administration has accordingly committed to investing well over $1 billion into the industry thus far. In my first 2 years in office, DHS invested over $100 million to significantly increase provider reimbursement rates for all age groups, which have remained flat for over a decade, reduced co-pays for families, and invested in programs to improve the quality of child care. In 2020, my administration dedicated $400 million in federal funding to stabilize the industry during the first phase of the pandemic. In addition to temporarily paying providers based on enrollment, as discussed above, DHS has waived co-pays for many families, expanding assistance to essential workers and families not eligible for subsidies but in need of care, and provided over $70 million in grants to providers. In cooperation with my legislative colleagues, my administration also committed to investing over $800 million in support for measures that move beyond pandemic-related stabilization and look to strengthen the state's child care system over the long term. In July, I signed Senate Bill number 3990, second reprint, dedicating $100 million in federal dollars to a child care revitalization fund, which will go to facilities improvement grants, business technical assistance, recruitment and retention bonuses for childcare workers, and workforce development efforts. And last month, I announced plans to invest another $700 million to help parents pay for childcare, provide financial incentives to workers, and support providers through additional grants. Finally, DHS just announced an investment of another $83 million to increase provider reimbursement rates for the state's Child Care Assistance Program. In total, DHS has increased monthly infant care assistance rates by nearly 70% and by close to 50% on average for all other age groups since I took office in 2018. Now here's the zinger. Are we ready? In spite of my strong commitment to the childcare industry and the New Jersey families who rely upon it, I am unable to support this bill in its present form. After careful consideration, I have concluded that I cannot support a policy that permanently requires DHS to provide subsidies based on enrollment. That was one of the number one things that we asked for when a lot of these stabilization grants were coming out. DHS's March 2020 decision was always intended as a temporary emergency measure. Although unanticipated federal funding has made it possible for DHS to continue the measure longer than originally planned. However, extending it indefinitely and after federal funding is exhausted would necessitate identifying a permanent alternative funding source that would almost certainly require DHS to sacrifice other current or future childcare policy priorities. So I highlighted that part because after all of the things that were done, after all of the letters that we wrote, the going before the different legislative or congressional, okay, so June 30th, 2022, okay? So we don't know what's gonna happen past that. So the enrollment-based payment policy has been in place during emergency circumstances, but has not yet been implemented in an environment where childcare attendance has remained more steady. Without understanding the full budget implications of paying based on enrollment, DHS is not in a position to make a permanent change to its policy. Accordingly, I agree with the legislature that DHS should analyze the long-term cost differential as provided for in the bill. I recommend, however, that DHS complete the proposed study in 12 months instead of 24 months so that we may sooner understand the full implications of a permanent enrollment-based subsidy. As part of its study, DHS should also consider whether other measures may be taken into account to achieve the goals contemplated by Assembly Bill number 4746, second reprint. Chief among them, the stability for providers that comes with the advanced knowledge of how much revenue they will receive each month. Therefore, I herewith return Assembly Bill number 4746, second reprint, and recommend that it be amended as follows. And so then it goes on to talk about the page numbers, the title of the page, the line that is going to be deleted and amended. And you'll see things like the supplementing chapter 5B of title 30, and inserting making an appropriation. You'll see deleting notwithstanding, and then putting in for the period beginning of the effective date. And then there will be word provider deleted and inserting center. And that goes on for a little while. So I think we need to watch some of these things where family child care is concerned. Okay, so this is just some of the amended pages, lines that were made in this bill. So we just take a look at this, just read it through just a little bit, and then signed Governor Murphy and attested by the chief counsel to the governor. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot of policy that is coming out in reference to child care, more specifically family child care, which is where work definitely needs to be. It definitely needs to happen. Once I read this bill and I thought, oh, wow, they're going to continue specifically the payment based on enrollment. And then I saw it in spite of, it was kind of another letdown. At least it goes to June of 2022 so that can give time perhaps to find other sources or to adjust some other funding sources, and to really, really allow them to take a look at how important it is for these monies to be extended to childcare. I think we saw that during lockdown, when childcare was essential for those workers who had to get to work, who were helping out communities. And so we really, really need to pay attention to this. I am super excited because policy has always been a part of childcare for me, particularly family childcare. And as I look at a lot of the professional um, things, or the things in professionalism that I'm particularly concerned about, policy is beginning to become a major, major part of the work that I do for family childcare and for childcare as a whole. So I'm going to keep you posted. I'm going to put a link down in the description box of this bill number 4746, second reprint, so that you can take a look at it. We still have a long way to go in reference to making childcare a priority and seeing providers as essential. So I will see you in the next video.